All right, welcome to week 5. This week again, we are looking at two important chapters. The chapter on political parties, participation in elections, and then we're going to look at chapter 8 on interest groups. And that again is another chapter. Both of these chapters really deal with what I call intermediary institutions. These political institutions that help people make sense of the world and identify where their interests lie. And both of the chapters that this week that are dealing with those kinds of institutions and the challenges confronting those institutions, as well as the chapter we dealt with last week on the media. Um, Political parties, I think, we have a two-party system, and that means basically that a lot of political interests are funneled into, Team Democrat or Team Republican. Whether you identify as a Republican or a Democrat is basically a function of a variety of factors. What part of the world you were raised in, what part of the country you were raised in, the degree of religiosity, the level of education that you happen to have, the level of education that your parents' political, identifications can, be an important influence. For example, I was born and raised in Georgia, but on a military base. Both my parents were military officers. I didn't know that much about my dad's political identification. My mom was out of the military by the time I was born. Uh, but my dad didn't talk about politics because as an officer in the military, he was sort of habituated to saying that's not my lane. I'm a military guy. I stay out of that kind of stuff. Um, it's important to keep in mind that our party system is an important aspect of democratic governance. One political scientist from the mid 20th century basically said political parties are unthinkable save in terms of parties. So what does that mean if our party system is not particularly healthy? There's a lot of being written right now about sort of the challenges that we're facing. And a lot of that comes down to the fact that our political parties are not particularly disciplined, and they're not particularly well supported, but they're in some ways almost too well supported when it comes to people having, relatively undemocratic views of government. I don't want to go too far into that. Just simply point out, one party systems don't tend to yield democracy. And we only have two parties. And so we really need two healthy parties in order to retain democratic governance. And the question is whether Americans really want to do that. I hope we do. Likewise, interest groups are very important. Um, Interest groups, again, people identify with certain interest groups for a reason. There's been a rise of ideological interest groups. Historically, economic interest groups have tended to be the most organized. And that means, for example, management groups like the Club for Growth versus labor groups like the Teamsters and groups like that. And again, there tends to be this sense of antipathy between, and among interest groups, that if you identify with this set of interests, you are antagonistic towards another set of interests. And that has a tendency to again play out in politics, and it tends to feed into our growing, ideological divide in American politics. So this week we have our last short writing project, which is the title of it is "Facebook is Killing Journalism." Hopefully you guys can read that and get some good ideas for how to analyze it. And then of course, as always, we have the forum and the quiz on these chapters. So let's make sure we have a good discussion this week, and let's have fun with it. Let's work with it.